In case you're wondering, there's a limited number of underground Colosseum tours a day. What do you see in this highly coveted experience? We highlight it today in this full-length virtual tour. One thing to note is that this video is pretty long, as we're showing as much of the tour in its full length as possible. If you want a quicker virtual tour of the Colosseum, please click on the link shown above. The tour we took was called Colosseum Underground and Dungeons. We booked it with a company called Roman Vacations. Starting at Via Cavour 301, we took a quick walk down Via del Colosseo to get to the fantastic monument. As you walk towards the Colosseum, you might be wondering why it's called the Colosseum in the first place. Well, legend has it that a giant statue of Emperor Nero once stood nearby, which was nicknamed the Colossus. And when the amphitheater was built, the nickname stuck, and thus the Colosseum was born. Speaking of interesting historical facts, did you know that the Colosseum was once used as a garden? Well, it's true. In the Middle Ages, the area around the Colosseum was used to grow vegetables and other crops. I guess you could say that the Colosseum was the original urban farm-to-table experience. Standing outside the Colosseum, you learn about some crazy things that used to go down inside the arena. In addition to animal hunts and gladiator fights, they also used to flood the arena and hold naval battles. Yup, you heard that right. They would bring in ships, fill the arena with water, and let them battle it out in front of a crowd of cheering spectators. Talk about taking entertainment to the next level. It sounds like an ancient Cirque du Soleil. And don't even get me started on the food that was served in the Colosseum. In addition to the usual fare of bread and olives, they also served exotic dishes like flamingo tongue and roasted ostrich. I don't know about you, but I think I'll stick to a nice pizza margherita. To get to the ground floor level of the Colosseum, we actually took a little shortcut and walked down through the subway station. As is with any underground construction project in Rome, one interesting fact about the Colosseum Metro is that they recently discovered 1800-year-old ruins as they were digging a shaft to the tunnel of the new Metro line C. It seems as if the ruins were a part of a house, perhaps once belonging to a senior Roman army officer, destroyed by fire. The skeleton of a large dog was also found at the bottom of the pit, its jaw and large front teeth easily recognizable. And this was just the latest in a series of archaeological discoveries since the construction started in 2007. Also discovered were army barracks and the remains of Emperor Hadrian's Athenaeum, an elite school dating back to the 2nd century. And with that tidbit of Roman Metro trivia, we exited the Metro to the base of the Colosseum. The walk continued to the entrance of the amphitheater in order to get in line to go inside. Walking towards the Colosseum, you gaze up, and even with all of the modern stadiums we have today, you cannot help but be amazed at its scale. In fact, the Colosseum is the largest ancient amphitheater ever built and was constructed using over 100,000 cubic meters of travertine stone. That's what I call a great venue for a rock concert. The Colosseum has 80 arched entrances. The main entrances were reserved for the emperor and other important officials. And it is interesting to see that the Colosseum's facade featured 3 levels of arches, each with a different architectural style. The first level has Doric columns, the second has Ionic, and the third has Corinthian. The Colosseum was originally built to hold gladiator contests and other public spectacles, with a seating capacity for over 50,000 spectators. As you can see, the Colosseum was damaged by earthquakes and looting over the centuries, but restoration efforts have preserved much of the structure's original beauty. To construct the Colosseum, workers quarried blocks of travertine from nearby quarries and transported them to the building site. Travertine was a popular building material in ancient Rome because of its durability, resistance to weathering, and ease in which it could be quarried and cut. The stones were cut into various shapes and sizes and fitted together using a technique known as opus quadratum, in which each stone was cut to fit precisely with those surrounding it. After the initial ticket check at the Colosseum, we had to go through security. Pets, glass bottles, large bags, aerosol spray cans, and of course, weapons of any kind are not allowed. Once through security, we walked around the ring corridors of the Colosseum. These areas around the arena are also known as vomitoria, which might sound like a gross term, but actually comes from the Latin word vomere, meaning to spew forth. These corridors were designed to allow the massive crowds to quickly enter and exit the amphitheater, much like the way food is expelled from the stomach. It is amazing that this design is still used in all modern stadiums today. Looking up, you can see the vaulted ceilings of the Colosseum halls. They are an excellent example of a barrel vault, which is a type of architectural feature commonly found in ancient Roman buildings. A barrel vault is essentially a series of arches placed side by side, creating a tunnel-like effect. One of the advantages of a barrel vault is that it provides excellent support, allowing for large open spaces without the need for additional columns or pillars. This made it an ideal choice for the massive Colosseum, which required a structure that could accommodate tens of thousands of spectators without sacrificing stability or safety. The barrel vaults of the Colosseum also have excellent acoustic properties. The curved surface of the vaults helped to reflect sound waves, which meant that the sounds of the crowds as well as the noise of the battles could be heard throughout the entire amphitheater. In addition to their functional properties, the barrel vaults of the Colosseum halls were also adorned with intricate designs and beautiful frescoes. These decorative elements were intended to impress and awe visitors, and were a reflection of the artistic and aesthetic sensibilities of the ancient Romans. You can see holes or gaps throughout the Colosseum arches. In some cases, there used to be metal clamps in those gaps, made of iron. These clamps held the stones together and provided additional strength and stability. In the Middle Ages, the Colosseum was actually used as a quarry for construction materials, and many of these clamps were taken and used in other buildings, as well as some of the stone itself. This practice of removing building materials from an existing structure for use in other construction projects was common practice and called spoliation. It is estimated that between 200 and 300 tons of iron clamps were removed and reused, a lot of it for weapons. The vomitorium was not just used for exiting the Colosseum, it was also used for entering the stadium, as well as for moving people and animals in and out of the arena. They were not just tunnels, but also included staircases and ramps that allowed people to move quickly and easily. The Colosseum had 80 vomitoria, which were numbered for ease of reference. Pausing a bit before heading to the underground, we're still awestruck at the size and scale of the amphitheater and marvel the fact it was built over 2,000 years ago. Even more amazing is the fact it was built in only 8 years, from 72 AD to 80 AD. That would be an incredibly short time to build such a structure, even with today's modern technology. While it is impressive that the Colosseum was built in just 8 years, it is important to recognize the human cost of this feat. The construction of the Colosseum was made possible by forced labor of tens of thousands of slaves who were often captured in military campaigns or bought from slave markets. These slaves were forced to work under grueling conditions with no regard for their health, safety, or well-being. In addition to using travertine stone, the builders also used a special type of concrete called pozzolana, which was made from volcanic ash and lime. This type of concrete was extremely durable and allowed the Colosseum to withstand the test of time. We then started our journey into the Colosseum, starting with the hypogeum, or Colosseum underground. To get there, we had to first head down a few flights of steps. For centuries, the underground area of the Colosseum was completely submerged until excavation work commenced towards the end of the 19th century, continuing all the way through 1930. Despite this, it wasn't until 2010 that the underground was open to tourists, with limited availability. Due to the immense popularity of the Colosseum Underground Tour, visitors can only explore it with a licensed tour guide. The hypogeum was a complex system of underground tunnels and chambers beneath the Colosseum. It was used to house animals, gladiators, and equipment for the games. The hypogeum covered an area of about 2.5 acres and was made up of 2 levels. The upper level was used to store equipment, while the lower level was where animals and gladiators were kept. The Colosseum Underground was not only a place for the gladiators to prepare and for animals to be housed, but it was also connected to a network of underground tunnels that led to various other buildings and industries. As such, these tunnels were essential for the efficient operation of the Colosseum, allowing for the easy transport of people, animals, and equipment. Gladiator schools, where gladiators trained and lived, were connected to the hypogeum through these tunnels. Also, the spoilarium, a gruesome area where dead bodies of the gladiators were stripped of their armor and weapons, was also accessible through the tunnels. There were even storerooms connected to the hypogeum, where food, drink, and other supplies were kept. And these tunnels were not just all open hallways. Many of them had pulley systems to transport animals and props. Looking at the floor of the underground, you will notice circular holes in the ground used to secure these systems. This illustration shows what the pulley system may have looked like within one of the tunnels. Exiting the tunnel, we walked under a recreated arena floor. As the original floor of the Colosseum was made of wood, it was destroyed in the 6th century AD. But it has been partially reconstructed to show where it would have been and how it would have worked during ancient times. Above us, the wooden floor was covered with sand to absorb the blood of gladiators and animals. The sand also provided better footing for the fighters. Although this recreation shows a flat platform, the full arena floor was not just a single flat surface. It was actually a complex series of platforms and trapdoors that could be raised or lowered to create different landscapes and scenarios. This allowed for a wide range of events, from naval battles to animal hunts, to be staged. You can see that only a portion of the stage has been rebuilt. Most of the underground area is still exposed to the sky above. When the Colosseum was in actual operation, the arena stage stretched across the entire oval of the amphitheater, completely covering the underground area we are in. One interesting fact is that the hypogeum, or Colosseum Underground, was not part of the original construction plan. The original construction of the Colosseum started under Emperor Vespasian around 72 AD, and was completed under his son Titus in 80 AD. It wasn't until Emperor Domitian's reign between 81 AD and 96 AD that the hypogeum was ordered to be built. Needless to say, the hypogeum was an impressive feat of engineering, with a complex network of tunnels, 80 vertical shafts, and even elevators and hydraulic mechanisms. Over time, the underground area was restructured and rebuilt at least a dozen times, becoming an increasingly sophisticated system to help make the events above ground even more spectacular. The underground also had a complex sewer system designed to keep the underground area dry and free of waste. Although much of the original structure has been destroyed, the channels and drains can still be seen, providing a glimpse into the sophisticated engineering that went into the construction of this ancient marvel. We continued our tour walking through the labyrinth of tunnels and rooms, built and designed to hold up to 10,000 people, along with weapons and stage props. Under the arena, the hypogeum was a bustling backstage for gladiators, animals, and other performers. It was also the intricate ecosystem for stagehands and mechanical systems for managing the arena stage along with props, weapons, animals, and even food and drink for spectators. Despite its seemingly vastness today, feeling like you're walking through streets of a small underground city, you can see how narrow some of the tunnels are and what a different experience it must have been for gladiators, performers, stagehands, and animal trainers working to create the spectacle above. The atmosphere and smell beneath the Colosseum must have been terrible. The hypogeum had little natural light, so lamps would have burned continuously, and the heat must have been almost unbearable. The stench of animals' excrement and the smell of blood and death would have filled every part of the underground. As such, despite its feat of engineering and usefulness, beneath the Colosseum must have been as torturous as the fights in the arena above. That being said, there are also some glamorous parts of the underground. In particular, the emperor had his own private tunnels, which were directly connected to his imperial residences, allowing him to avoid any interactions with other spectators. The Vestal Virgins, who were also allowed to attend the games, had their own separate tunnels to enter and leave the Colosseum. Notably, the tiles used in these tunnels were distinct from the others and were decorated in a grandiose manner, emphasizing the importance of those who would use them. It is clear that the design of the tunnels was not just for functional purposes, but also for the grandeur and glory of the Roman Empire. Even beneath the Colosseum, every detail was meticulously planned and executed to display the power and wealth of the Roman elite. Part of the underground tour, you get to see a reconstructed lift mechanism. This is a recreation of the original lift system used to raise and lower animals, gladiators, and scenery from the underground tunnels directly to the arena floor. This intricate system of mechanics below the arena floor enabled the venue to rapidly change stage and scenery for different shows and contests. This was essential as the Colosseum was a hub of entertainment in ancient Rome, and the Romans were avid spectators of various events that were held there. Some events, such as the games, or ludi, were held annually and lasted for several days, while others could go on for much longer. Each day's events were meticulously planned with a strict timetable, ensuring that something new was always on display. From hunting to circus acts, executions to gladiatorial battles, there was a constant rotation of activities. The Roman engineers faced the challenge of creating an efficient network of winches and capstans to hoist the heavy animals from the hypogeum to the main arena. For the largest animals, such as elephants and hippopotamuses, they developed mechanical devices called hegmata, which were robust, hinged platforms that could be also lifted to the arena. To ensure the latest and most spectacular games, the hypogeum was repeatedly restructured, using the latest Roman technology. As mentioned, there were no less than 12 updates to the underground over its years of use. And ancient Rome had no shortage of manpower, as teams of trained slaves operated the machinery and equipment, working together to lift animals, men, and scenery into the arena. As mentioned, the excavation at the hypogeum is rather recent, with it finally being cleared in the 1930s. Much of the inner workings of the underground were deciphered by Heinz-Jürgen Beste of the German Archaeological Institute in Rome. He is the leading authority on the hypogeum and has spent over 14 years understanding and reconstructing the complex mechanisms and systems used by the ancient Romans. Surprisingly, the hypogeum was almost arranged and run like a massive sailing ship, using similar systems of ropes and pulleys organized in small spaces. Slaves would have to drill in order to ensure the shows ran smoothly. Also, like a ship, everything could be dismantled and stored away when not in use. Game days were usually split into a few phases. During the morning, there was the venatio, wild beast hunts. Sometimes the exotic animals would just be shown in a parade, but most of the time they were killed in hunting games. This included elephant, rhinoceroses, bears, elk, tigers, leopards, lions, and more. During the opening 100 days of games, over 9,000 animals were killed. In the hypogeum, the stage crew would need to manage the transport and release of these animals into the stage for both spectacle and surprise to keep the audience entertained. Next was the midday games, where condemned criminals, prisoners, and other unfortunates were executed. These executions were perversely made entertaining. Anything from being slaughtered by animals to being executed as part of theatrical scenes. As we leave the Colosseum underground via a narrow set of steps, we head to the arena stage, where the spectators would crowd to see the last and main event, the gladiator fights. The name gladiator came from the Latin word for the sword used during the fighting, gladio. The Colosseum gladiators were usually slaves, prisoners of war, or people condemned for committing some crime. As you emerge from the underground, you are surrounded by sunlight and step onto the arena floor. The openness of the large amphitheater is jarring from the narrow passages of the hypogeum, and you can imagine 50,000 spectators cheering at the games being conducted on the stage. From this vantage point, you get a full view of the three major sections covered in the tour of the Colosseum. The partial restoration of the arena floor, where the gladiators would have been during the fights, the maze of rooms and tunnels from the hypogeum, and the many levels of seating tiers for the spectators. Needless to say, the building of this massive structure was a significant undertaking. Its history dates to even before it was commissioned by Emperor Vespasian in 72 AD. Prior to Vespasian, Emperor Nero built a vast palace complex, the Domus Aurea, in the center of Rome. It became a symbol of his success and extravagance. It included a man-made lake, sprawling gardens, and numerous buildings and structures, many of which were adorned with precious metals and jewels. After Nero's death in 68 AD, the Roman Senate declared him a public enemy and ordered that his name be erased from all public monuments and buildings. However, the vast palace complex that Nero had built was too large and too expensive to demolish. When Vespasian became emperor in 69 AD, he saw an opportunity to rid Rome of Nero's palace complex and to gain support from the Roman people. He ordered the lake to be drained and the land to be repurposed for the construction of the Flavian Amphitheater, what we commonly know as the Colosseum today. To help fund the project and to gain the support of the Roman people, Vespasian ordered that games be held in the Colosseum for 100 days, during which time admission would be free to all. Needless to say, free games were a massive success and attracted thousands of spectators from all over the Roman Empire. The Colosseum quickly became a symbol of Rome's power and wealth and helped to solidify Vespasian's position as emperor. Today, the Colosseum is one of the most popular tourist attractions in Rome, with over 7.5 million visitors each year. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and is a symbol of Rome and the Roman Empire. And it's no wonder, as there's so much ancient innovation and history at this site. If you scan across the arena, you can find a cross in one area of the Colosseum. It is a symbol of Christianity, which is the religion that ultimately triumphed over the violent entertainment that was once held there. It is located in the area that was once the emperor's seat. The emperor's seat was an exclusive box reserved for the emperor and his family during the thrilling games. This box was adorned with exquisite mosaics and luxurious materials and provided a close-up view of the gruesome battles unfolding below. The Colosseum had 4 tiers of seating, with the first tier being the closest to the arena. The first tier was reserved for the emperor, his family, and other important people. The second tier was reserved for senators and other wealthy Romans. The third tier was reserved for ordinary Roman citizens, and the fourth tier was reserved for women, slaves, and other poor people. The seats themselves were made of solid marble and stone, and you can see a semi-restored section close to the partial arena stage. While the first and second tier were divided into reserved sections, the other tiers were not, and people would sit wherever they could find space. Each tier had its own entrances and exits, and there were staircases and ramps that connected the different levels. The Colosseum also had a complex system of awnings and sails that could be deployed to provide shade and protect the spectators from the sun and the rain. And in the near future, you might actually be able to be a spectator in the Colosseum yourself. The Italian government is planning to rebuild the Colosseum floor with a retractable wooden floor. After the renovation, the Colosseum plans to host concerts and theater productions on the new floor. From the current arena floor, you can walk through a very famous archway, the Porta Libitunensis, or Gate of Death. It is at the eastern end of the Colosseum and opposite the Porta Triumphalis, Gate of Triumph, on the western side of the Colosseum. The Gate of Death was named after the Roman goddess of funerals, Libitina, and it is said that it was through this gate that the dead and wounded would be carried out from the arena after gladiatorial contests. A large arched doorway made of brick and stone, and it was decorated with marble. The interior of the gate was lined with marble benches where the dead and wounded could be laid out. After exiting the gate, you can look up at the facade and find a plaque etched with the original name of the Colosseum, Amphitheatrum Flavium, or the Flavian Amphitheater. This was the original name as the Colosseum was commissioned and built by emperors of the Flavian dynasty. This particular plaque was requisitioned by Pope Benedict XVI. Finally, as the last part of the tour, you can head up to the second level, where there is a museum of Colosseum artifacts, including models and illustrations of some of the mechanics and systems used in the amphitheater, along with mosaics, sculptures, and stone carvings. And you can exit to where the second tier seating would have been to get a higher panoramic view of the entire stadium. We hope that you have enjoyed this video and learned a little bit about the Colosseum in this virtual tour. Thank you for watching, and don't forget, like and subscribe.